Indirect painting, imprimatura and Umber underpainting. Indirect painting. Indirect painting is a technique in which a painting is built up in individual layers. The indirect painting technique has been around for centuries. Artists such as Titian, Rubens, and Rembrandt used the indirect painting technique. The most common approach to indirect painting involves creating an imprimatura layer and underdrawing a monochrome underpainting, a layer of opaque color, and a layer of transparent color called a glaze. Imprimatura. In painting, imprimatura is an initial stain of color painted on a ground. Imprimatura provides a painter with a transparent, toned ground that is less harsh than the white of the gesso ground. The imprimatura layer should be as light as the lightest value in the subject. The term itself stems from the Italian and literally means first paint layer. Here's an example of a canvas with an imprimatura layer in yellow ochre. Creating an imprimatura layer is fairly straightforward. If you're using oils, thin the paint with mineral spirits or turpentine so that you create a transparent wash that flows easily. Lay your canvas flat on the tabletop and using a large brush, apply the imprimatura layer in even strokes so that the entirety of the canvas is covered. If you're using acrylics, thin the paint with water and follow the same steps. Working with oils over acrylics is perfectly fine as long as the acrylic is dry. If you're using oils for your imprimatura layer, make sure that the layer of paint is dry before proceeding to the next step. Here's an example of an underdrawing over an imprimatura layer. Keep in mind that the underdrawing should be a line drawing. In the next step, which is the underpainting stage, we will block in the values. And another example in which the underdrawing is done using a thin round brush with burnt umber. Umber underpainting. In art, an underpainting is an initial layer of paint applied to a ground, which serves as a base for subsequent layers of paint. Underpaintings are often monochromatic and help to define color values for later painting. Earth tones are often used for underpaintings. Burnt umber is a popular choice as it is a stable earth tone that is dark enough to achieve a full range of values. The underpainting needs to be completely dry before applying the initial color layer. The underpainting is where the artist begins to block in the values of the subject, including shadows contained within the objects and cast shadows. Also, the foreground, middle ground, and background information. The underpainting serves as a foundation for the color layers. In the underpainting, the focus is on establishing the value structure of your subject. It can be fairly loose in its execution, keeping in mind that in the following stages you can continue to refine the details and the brushwork. And here's another example of an underpainting that's fairly loose in its execution. Keep in mind that an underpainting doesn't have to happen in one shot. It can happen in stages as well. Once an underpainting is dry, you can go back into it and fine-tune the details and the value structure. For example, in this sequence, you can see on the left-hand side that the artist has begun by blocking in the large areas of darkest value. In the middle, we begin to establish more detail. And finally, on the right-hand side, we have a more complete underpainting. Here's an example of a beautiful underpainting that looks like a finished work. In this painting, we see the underpainting on the left executed in burnt sienna, and on the right, the addition of color layers over the underpainting. The choice of color for the underpainting works well with the subject. Depending on the transparency of the color layers, the underpainting can show through, adding to the color scheme of a piece. In this sequence, we see the underpainting on the left. In the middle, we see the addition of a dead color layer or grisaille layer over the underpainting, which is typical of the Flemish technique. And on the right, the addition of the initial color layers. Still life sequence. In this series of slides, I will show you a painting that I made from beginning to end. It's a sequence that begins with the imprimatura and underdrawing, as you can see here. In this slide, I begin my preliminary blocking of values using burnt umber. Here we have an underpainting that's somewhat complete. And here I've added more contrast and more details to the underpainting. Once an underpainting is complete, you can begin adding the initial layers of opaque color. I like to start on the left-hand side because I'm right-handed and I work from left to right to avoid any unnecessary smudging. Here I begin adding color to the jug. And here I've added color to the top of the jug. This information is somewhat loose in its execution, knowing that I have a couple more stages to go in which I can refine the details and the color. And now I begin adding my preliminary layers of color to the pear. At this point, the initial opaque color layers on the objects are complete, and I can begin blocking in the background. As I fill in the background and foreground areas, I take this opportunity to refine the contours and the edges of the objects and to clean up the painting in general. And here's the finished piece after the glaze layer has been applied. Glazing is a technique in which we apply transparent layers of color to the opaque layers in order to create subtle adjustments in terms of tone, value, and color. The opaque layer must be dry as well as each layer of glaze before applying a subsequent layer.